Buon pomeriggio, mi chiamo Silvia Petrosillo e lavoro presso la Macmillan Education. Vi vorrei dare il benvenuto al primo di una serie di 5 webinar organizzati da Macmillan Education in collaborazione con la Mondadori Education. Questa serie di sessioni avverrà ogni giovedì pomeriggio, ogni 2 giovedì pomeriggio fino al 27 di novembre e all'incirca alle 3 del pomeriggio per circa 40 minuti. Lasceremo poi a fine sessione 5-10 minuti per le vostre domande a cui la nostra speaker qui seduta di fianco a me, Anila Scott-Monkhouse, risponderà. Ora vi vorrei mostrare il calendario dei futuri eventi. Ecco, come vedete quindi cominciamo oggi, finiremo il 27 di novembre. Tutti i webinar si rivolgono ai docenti di lingua inglese, saranno interamente in inglese, fatta eccezione per la prima parte del webinar del 16 di ottobre, quello sul digitale. Abbiamo cercato di scegliere una serie di argomenti che speriamo possano essere da voi considerati utili, insomma, che possiate utilizzarli proprio nel vostro prezioso lavoro didattico. Qualora avesse ulteriori suggerimenti, richieste di argomenti nuovi, diversi per i prossimi webinar, vi preghiamo pure di inviare un'email a italy.info@macmillan.com. Ecco. Ora un paio di comunicazioni di servizio. Allora, per qualsiasi problema tecnico durante la sessione, quindi tecnico audiovisivo, voi abbiate qualsiasi problema, potete rivolgervi al servizio clienti al numero di telefono 800 12 39 31. Inoltre potete, se volete, non prendere appunti durante la sessione, poiché in un secondo momento potrete sia scaricare la presentazione sia visualizzare l'intero video sul canale YouTube Mondadori Education. Questo tipo di informazioni le troverete proprio sul sito mondadorieducation.it/English, scusate. Ecco, lascio ora la parola alla nostra esaminatrice Anila Scott-Monkhouse. Vi ringrazio e buona visione.
Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar. I'm Anila Scott-Monkhouse, I work for Parma University, and today we're going to look at the changes to Cambridge English First. Now, as Sylvia said, don't worry too much about taking notes. We have very little time and we have a lot of things to look at. So we're going to whiz through some parts, but you will be sent the PDF. Now, I'd like to start by giving you an overview of the changes and then take a detailed look at the tasks and changes paper by paper. And along the way, I would like to make some suggestions with some ideas for teaching. So, let's have a look at the main changes. Changes come into effect from January 2015 and are valid for both Cambridge English First and Cambridge English First for Schools. Starting from January, there will only be 4 components because reading and use of English are going to be combined. This means that the exam will be shorter. It will be 30 minutes shorter. In other words, rather than lasting 4 hours, it will last 3 hours and 30 minutes, which will definitely make it more user-friendly. There will also be new tasks in the reading and the speaking components. Now, we have said that the use of English and reading are going to be combined. However, they still will be scored separately. So they still will carry 40% of the weight. Why have they been combined? Well, they have a similar focus. In other words, the skills and strategies used by candidates to carry out the tasks are basically the same, as the tasks share the same key features. Now, let's start by looking at this use of English and reading component. Now, compared to the current version, the general tasks remain the same, but each task has fewer questions. So overall, candidates will have 10 questions less. Teachers and candidates, therefore, are familiar with the tasks, so we can continue using any material we already have. Now, use of English will come before the reading. This is because texts are shorter and they become progressively longer and more complex. The focus moves from word and sentence level to text content and structure. Candidates are required to deal with different text types. So, for example, fiction, magazines, etc. And they need to adopt different micro-skills and strategies to carry out the tasks. Now, we're already familiar with the tasks, but let's bear in mind that keyword transformation in the use of English, multiple choice and capped text in the reading part carry 2 marks per each correct answer. So let's start with task 1. Task 1 is a multiple choice. Candidates are given a short text, and the questions will be reduced from 12 to 8 gaps. For each gap, they will have 4 option items. Focus here is on lexis. Now, we haven't given you the full text, just one sentence. I'll just give you a few seconds to read it. So if we were helping our students prepare for this, we would encourage them to look at what comes both before and after the gap. What would be the correct answer for this one? Yes, it would be play, because we have a collocation. So it's play the part. Task 2. Task 2 is an open close. This again is going to be reduced from 12 to 8 gaps. However, the students get absolutely no suggestion on the word to use. So they get this short text and they need to focus on the grammar. What kind of word is missing? Is it a preposition? Is it a pronoun? An article? Could it be an auxiliary? Once again, we haven't given you the full text, but just a short sentence. I'll just give you the time to read it and think of what might be missing. You might like to send in your answers. So again, we'd get our students to think about what kind of word is missing and to look at what comes before and after the gap, and then to think about the whole sentence so that it makes sense. And so in gap 1, yes, so yes, I see we need the degree adverb so. It introduces a that clause, it modifies the adjective and introduces a that clause. And then gap 2, yes, we get on because we have a fixed phrase on a number of occasions. Okay, then, now task 3. Task 3 is going to be reduced from 10 questions to 8 questions. The focus here is on building words from a stem that is given. So once again, candidates are given a short text, and at the end of each line where they have a gap, they have a stem word which they need to modify to be able to form a word which fits in logically into the text. Now I'll just give you the time to look at these and think of the missing word. So once again, we need to think of what part of speech is missing. So could it be an adjective? Could it be an adverb? Could it be a noun? And yes, here it's going to be a noun. So it's going to be magicians. It could have hypothetically been magical or magically, but it doesn't fit in here, obviously. Obviously, we need to get our students to think, is it a plural noun? Could it be negative? Let's say that the word was possible at the end. It might have been impossibility that they needed to write into the gap. Okay, so let's move on to task 4. Task 4 is the only non-text based task. Students here are given sentences. They're given separate sentences. This is going to be reduced from 8 sentences to 6 sentences, which need to be transformed. So they need to produce a sentence which means the same as the original sentence and use a keyword that cannot be changed. What they need to do is to fill in a gap by producing the words missing and fits in perfectly with the beginning and the end and means the same as the original sentence. I'll just give you a minute to look at this. So yes, we need to use used. So it's going to be, I still haven't got used to wearing glasses. So students only need to write 4 words, and they have to remember that they only copy these 4 words, and if they write contractions, contractions count as 2 words. And one of the words they need to write is the keyword that is actually given and cannot be changed. Now this is where the use of English part ends, and as we have seen, it has remained basically the same. With task 5, the reading begins. So as you can see, you've got a longer text. Now I know you can't read it, it's too small, but this is what it looks like. So they have a longer text and they're given 6 questions with 4 option answers. Now this is going to be reduced from 8 questions to 6 questions, and students need to choose the correct answer to answer the question which corresponds to what is written in the text. Now we need to encourage our students to look at questions and identify keywords in the questions. And before looking at the answers, which might even confuse them, look for information in the text. They need to avoid word spotting. So it's important that they learn to underline parts in the text which support their answers and find reasons for rejecting the other options. But right now, rather than focusing on reading skills, we'd like to look together at some ways of building up their vocabulary and practicing paraphrasing strategies, which are going to be key features, key strategies to develop for our exam, but also in life. Now, what we've done here is we've copied the first paragraph from the text we showed you before. And what we could do in class with our students is ask them to look at some interesting language. So we've done this for you here. For example, we've highlighted in red some of the words which might be interesting, things like light and spacious, free of paper, there are no ashtrays inside. Nice, interesting vocabulary and structures and functions and phrases. Now, if we would like to help our students to develop their paraphrasing strategies, we can try to help them through a more guided exercise and then a less guided exercise. But why focus on paraphrasing strategies? Well, it's important throughout the whole text. Think about the sentence transformation that we looked at before. But then we see these strategies being useful and pop up over and over again over the whole exam. And after all, paraphrasing strategies are important in life too. So we said we could start by giving them a more guided exercise. So let's produce a sentence which means something that's already in the text. So we give them a sentence which is a synonymous sentence of what is already in the text. Students complete the second sentence by adding words which we have highlighted before. So the sentence that they need to complete paraphrases. In other words, they go back to the original text from what we've given them. And then they can go themselves and check their answers. Let's see if you can do this one together. I know you had very little time, but let's have a look at the second sentence and see if you can think of the word that was missing and that was there. Does anyone remember that one? And we have our reputation is the fault of cinema and TV. And yes, blame. Cinema and TV are to blame for our reputation. So this is more guided because we've actually given them a synonymous sentence ourselves. However, after a while, we can work in the opposite direction. And we give them the sentence taken from the text and ask them to produce a sentence which means more or less the same. So if the sentence is, the desks are free of paper, they move from the text to producing a synonymous sentence, and you have something like, there is no paper on the desk, or I can't see any paper on the desks, or anything which means more or less the same. And it's important that students learn to record both sentences in their own notebook. So let's go back to our tasks in the exam. So task 6 is a gapped text. This is what it looks like. Once again, I know it's too small for you to read, but what you have is a longer text with 6 gaps. So this is going to be reduced from 7. Candidates are given 7 sentences which are being removed and need to be reinserted. So they have 1 distractor. So we need to encourage our students to look at what comes before and after the gap, because the sentence was fitting logically because of the topic, the language links, for example, pronouns, time expressions, or are there any elements of comparison or contrast? Just to give you an example, we've copied the sentence with the first gap. And if you look at this, we see that before the gap, we have the adjective uncomplicated objectives. We've got the word points, and after the gap, we've got points again. We've got a goal, and we've got a penalty. So which would be the correct sentence? Okay, this one's going to be sentence C, where it talks about simple methods of scoring. Task 7, the last task for the reading, the use of English and reading component. Now, this is a multiple matching exercise. Candidates need to match a question to a particular part of the text. So they're given 10 questions. This is going to be reduced from 15. and they need to match that question to a particular part of a longer text and need to understand why it matches. Now, what we get to do in class, what we do with our students is get them to underline keywords in the questions to find similar meanings in the text. Now, I know this is too small for you to read, so we need to work in the opposite direction. We've already done it for you. We've already underlined the information in the text. And if you look, Colin Dodson says, I'm not a fitness fan. So this answers question 4, where it says which person is not particularly keen on taking exercise. So he's not keen on taking exercise, exercise being a synonym of fitness, so he's not a fitness fan. So overall, we can say that the use of English and reading has not changed too much. They've got fewer questions, but the tasks are basically the same. Now we look at the writing. The writing has an important change. However, it maintains the same timing. Now they still have 2 tasks. One is compulsory and one is a task that they choose, but they need to produce slightly longer pieces of writing. We said the first task has changed. They still have a compulsory task, but it's not a letter or an email anymore. It's going to be an essay, and prompts are going to be provided. In the second task, they will be given a choice. They will be given a choice of 3, and they can choose. It can either be an article, it could be a letter or an email still, a report or a review. However, if our candidates are going for First for Schools, the story is still an option, and the set text is still an option. However, not the report. So let's look at these in detail. We said task 1, the compulsory task is going to be an essay. Candidates are required to write between 140 and 190 words, so this is longer. It currently is 120, 150. They are given a topic of general interest, so no special knowledge is required, and they need to give an opinion on that topic and support it with reasons. Now, 2 ideas are already given in note form, and the candidates must use these. However, candidates must produce one of their own. So let's say that this is the task that our candidates are given. So as you can see, they have 2 prompts to use. So how would we help our students prepare for this? Well, first of all, let's get them to brainstorm ideas on what their idea is. They were comparing watching a movie at home or at the cinema. So they could think of, for example, which is cheaper, which offers better quality viewing, which is more enjoyable with friends or family, getting them to brainstorm their ideas and then plan their essay. Now, they could basically plan it in 2 different ways. One could be to discuss both sides of the argument. So in the first paragraph, give a general statement in which they describe the advantages of both, and then move on by talking about one in the second paragraph, so for example at home, and the other in the third paragraph, so for example in the cinema, and end by giving their opinion. Alternatively, they could actually give only one point of view from the start. So start by giving their opinion and then explain why. So in each paragraph, give reasons why it is better. So explain why it is more comfortable, why it's more enjoyable, why the atmosphere is better, and conclude by restating their opinion again. Now, it's very important that our candidates, our students, get lots of practice in this, and also that they look at model answers. Now, we've given you 2 examples, this one in which both sides of the argument are considered, and the following one in which only one side is considered. Now, what is important is that we get our students to look at layout of the text. So, for example, this has been divided into paragraphs. It begins with a general introduction, and then develops with positive aspects, and then negative aspects, and we've got a conclusion. It's also very important that they focus on the style that is used as well. It needs to be constantly formal. So it's interesting to give them some useful language, phrases that they might use over and over again, things like many people feel that, or it is generally agreed that. Otherwise, as we said, they can discuss only one point of view. And let's give them examples and models to look at again. So look at the division into paragraphs, beginning with the introduction, and then giving reasons in each paragraph, so one reason per paragraph. And then in the conclusion, restate their opinion. And once again, get them to look at some nice, interesting phrases. So expressions like, I personally feel that, I firmly believe that, my personal view is that. So this is how we can help our students in the first compulsory task. The second task, we said, is something that they choose. They're given a choice of 3, and here they're given a range of text types to choose from. Now, it's very important for them to realize that each type has its own specific characteristics. So they are given a topic, they're given a purpose, a context, and a target reader in the rubric. Now, we said that if they're taking the general Cambridge English First, they can choose between an article, email or letter, report or review. But if they're going for First for Schools, then they're given a choice of 4. And these 4 also includes one set text question, which can be an article, essay, review, or letter on the set text. And still, the story may be one of the options, but not the report. So we said that these text types have specific purposes and specific features. So it might be useful to get our students to identify these purposes and features before we expect them to produce something. This has been adapted from Cambridge English First Handbook. Now, I'll give you a minute to look at the first sentence and think if this is an article, an email or letter, a report or review. So the author is describing an experience and giving an opinion. So it could be something about a film, it could be a holiday, and yes, this would be, yes, a review. Now, once we've done that, so we've got our students to look at the main features of these text types, why not give them some example sentences and ask them to tell us what kind of text these sentences belong to. So, for example, let's have a look at sentence C. I'll just give you a minute to read it. Yes, this would be taken from a review. But what about D then? Yes, this would be a letter. It's going to be a formal letter because it's a letter of application. So getting them to identify the sentences and what kind of text they belong to. Then slowly start moving on to getting them to produce them. But of course, giving them plenty of models. So for example, looking at an article, focus attention on the title. There's a nice catchy title with the use of question marks or exclamation marks to attract the reader's attention. Again, it's divided into paragraphs. It has a nice lively style and it ends with a closing comment. An email or letter, they have an input, they need to follow on from the input and choose the appropriate style. This is a letter to a friend, so it's going to be informal. It's important that we get them to focus attention on an appropriate opening and suitable closing phrases. And of course, the style needs to be appropriate to the type of letter. So in this case, we said it's going to be an informal letter. Now, let's say our candidates are preparing for a report. Now, the importance in a report is that they need to use headings, so they need to think of suitable headings for each section, and it begins with an introduction. Now, the introduction summarizes the aim of the report. Now, this is where our paraphrasing strategies come out again. Candidates do not copy the wording of the question, but they write the same thing in different words. They then follow on with different paragraphs, each one, as we said, with it's a suitable heading, and they conclude with either a comment or a recommendation. A review, again, divided into paragraphs. It begins with an introduction with a general opinion. it gives something positive about what we're talking about. In this case, it's a shall, something negative, and it ends with some kind of recommendation. And what if we're preparing for First for Schools? Well, if they decide to write a story, they need to prepare the background for the story. So things like when or where, so we get the time and the place. The story needs to develop, and we need to think of some nice direct speech, time linkers, appropriate use of past tenses, and perhaps a nice little element of surprise in the outcome of the story. And we did say that the set text is still an option in First for Schools, and again we would have to concentrate on either a letter, an essay, an article, or a review if they were based on the set text. So, what can we do in class with our candidates, with our students, to prepare for the writing component? Well, as we said, brainstorming ideas is important, so getting all the students, either as a class or in groups, to think of ideas, focusing on the target reader, on the purpose, on the topic, and then very important to plan their composition, thinking about a suitable introduction and the conclusion, organizing their ideas, so dividing them into paragraphs, using linkers and connectors. Important that they learn to proofread, so correct as many mistakes as they can before deciding that they're finished their piece of writing. And why not get them involved in peer reviewing, so asking them to look at each other's work, but perhaps give them something to focus on. So perhaps get them to read their partner's text and look for something positive and give feedback. So things like, I like the way you described, etc., etc. And the next time maybe they could look for something that they think could be improved. So things like, I would change, and they could say why they think something might be useful, interesting to change. Then get them to think about an interesting grammar point. So look for a past perfect continuous or a third conditional. And finally, why not try to find and correct a mistake? So getting them involved with each other. And this is where our listening component starts. Now, the listening component is going to be approximately the same length, so more or less 40 minutes. It's still going to include 4 tasks, and there are no big changes except for in the multiple choice, the first task with the short recordings, and maybe a greater change in the multiple matching with a short monologue. Now, students are still required to listen to a variety of voices and a range of spoken materials. So they get extracts from news, talks, everyday conversations, and they hear each one twice. So let's start with the first one. We said the first one is a multiple choice task. They have 8 questions, and they're given 3 option answers. Now the options are no longer read out by the recorded speaker. So they need to practice to read the answers and to focus on keywords. Now we have given you here in blue the transcript, which they obviously wouldn't have in the exam. And the answer to this question, just give you a few seconds. The answer to this question is going to be C, okay? The second task in listening is a monologue, and students are given 8 sentences to complete. Now, these sentences are a summary of what is being said in the recording, and they're giving the situation in the rubric. So here, for example, they're listening to the manager of the fire station. In blue, again, we've given you the transcript, which obviously students wouldn't have in the exam. When we're preparing our students, we'd get them to look at what kind of word is missing. So here, for example, we need to think of what is missing, and the word would be a noun. So we know that we're listening for a noun and not, for example, an adjective. And here the missing word is going to be qualifications. Task 3. We said task 3 has one of the major changes. Now this is a multiple matching exercise. The candidates listen to 5 short related monologues, and they're given 8 answers to choose from. So they have 8 statements, and each one summarizes the speaker's main idea. Compared to the current version, they are going to have 2 extra distractors. So they have 3 distractors altogether. Now, here it's very important that our students learn to underline keywords. And as we get them to practice for the correct answer, when we're checking, why not look at the script and then see why that answer is the correct one? And why not also give them maybe a hypothetical student who has written incorrect answers, and by looking at the script, decide why this student may have made these mistakes. Now, Cambridge English First Handbook itself gives us a suggestion here when it says students could practice doing the exercise with the tape script. But again, it tells us that a relevant exercise would be practicing saying the same thing in a different way. In other words, we've got our paraphrasing strategies again, getting the students to think, what might the speaker say? So in a situation like, you will hear 5 different people speaking about the job they would like to do. Okay. If we look at the first the first statement, I will need a specific qualification to do this job. Can we predict alternative ways of saying the same thing? So for example, here, we've got, I've got to pass some exams, I've been advised to do a college course, I'll have to study for a degree. So once again, our paraphrasing strategies are important. The last task in the listening, multiple choice again. Candidates listen to a dialogue. The context, once again, is given in the rubric. So we have here someone talking about unusual sports. And they have 3 option answers. Once again, in blue, we've given you the transcript, which obviously candidates don't have in the exam. Just give you a few seconds to choose the correct answer. And yes, it's going to be A, but it might have been C. It talks about aggressive. So again, avoiding word spotting, try to get our students to understand why an option may be true, but it's not the right answer for that particular question. So once again, when we're checking, perhaps have a look at the transcript. So what can we do to help our students develop their listening skills? Well, getting them to predict as much as possible by using the rubric, getting them to paraphrase alternative ways of saying the same thing, and identifying keywords in the questions. And now we've got the last component, speaking. Now the speaking has the same overall format. It lasts approximately 14 minutes and is carried out by trained examiners in paired format. It's divided into 4 parts, and there are some changes in the second and the third part. Now let's look at them one by one. Now, the exam begins with a short ice-breaking section. It's going to be reduced from 3 minutes to 2 minutes, and it gives the candidates the chance to settle. What they need to practice here, to prove here, is their ability in using social language. So they are asked personal questions, things like, do you spend most of your free time on your own or with friends? Now, what's very important here is that our students don't recite well-rehearsed, pre-prepared answers. So for example, in class, we could give them cards with fake identities. So they could be, in the next exercise, you could be Spider-Man, and you could be telling me how you spend your evenings. The second part is still the individual long-term, where one candidate at the time is given a pair of photographs to compare, and the candidate needs to express opinions, but the listening candidate is going to answer a question related to the 2 photographs of his or her partner. So the listening candidate is actually listening and will have 30 seconds to answer. So it's going to be slightly longer than the 20 seconds they have now. So let's say our candidate is given these 2 photographs. So the first candidate, let's call this candidate A. Candidate A is describing and comparing the 2 photographs and has a question to answer. So what are the people enjoying about these different activities? It's important that students don't describe the photographs in details, but rather they give some kind of opinion, they speculate on what they can see. And then the second candidate who's been listening, after 1 minute, answers a question which could be something like, do you enjoy reading? And then, of course, it's candidate B's turn to describe 2 photographs, and candidate A will be answering a short question. The collaborative task. The collaborative task is linked to the last part of the speaking exam. We've got a situation in which our students are cooperating, and then it follows on with a discussion which is connected to the collaborative task. So they are going to exchange ideas and opinions, but then they will be asked questions in which they have to, they will be given more abstract questions, and they will be expressing and justifying opinions with a much larger scope. So let's look at the collaborative task. Students are given a situation. So for example, the History Museum would like to introduce some new features to attract more visitors. They need to discuss the different options that they're given for 2 minutes. Now, this has changed because they in the current version, they get visuals, so pictures, but sometimes pictures are a little hard to interpret, so they will be given some written prompts, and they need to discuss the different options. Now, this is where our paraphrasing strategies come out again. It's important that our candidates don't continue repeating the same words that they have on the card or that the examiner used. So rather than continuously saying these ideas would appeal to, they have expressions such as it would be suitable, it would be enjoyable, it would attract. So there again, we've got our paraphrasing strategies. After 2 minutes, the examiner will actually stop them and ask them to reach a decision. Now, candidates are actually assessed on the way they interact, so it's important that they prove that they have been listening to each other. So why not get them to use nice expressions like, as I said before, you made a good point, we both agreed, and they compare options and they prove that they've been listening to each other. So it might be interesting to give them a recording of an oral exam and then get them to think of which expressions are used, to use different words rather than continuously repeating the words that the examiner used, and also expressions that describe, that prove that they've been listening to each other. So here in red, for example, you've got alternative expressions to appeal, and you've got underlined in black, you've got ways of showing that they've been listening to each other. Now at the end, there's a nice, interesting second conditional. So if the theatrical representations were funny and not serious, then that would be. So they're speculating. This is something important, that they show that they can actually have some more complex reasoning. Then we said, from the collaborative task, it moves on to the discussion, in which they have to express and justify their opinions. So they have questions such as, what do you think makes a good museum? Or do you agree that learning about the past is important for our future? These are more abstract questions to provide a wider scope. So what can we do in class to help our students practice? Well, they have to learn to link to what each other says, so they need to sustain an interaction and learn to take turns. They're both talking and they're both listening to each other. They're exchanging ideas. And if one is slightly quieter than the other, then getting them to elicit opinions from each other. Expressing agreement or disagreement, why not? And being able to justify their opinions, so organizing their ideas. Making suggestions with, for example, the use of question tags, things like, this looks interesting, doesn't it? Comparing options, giving examples, making hypotheses, what if? And of course we said, referring to previous parts and negotiating towards a decision. So, as we have seen, Cambridge First still retains most of its features and tasks. Changes overall are not too dramatic. It's definitely going to be more user-friendly, and it's going to be closer to the potential needs of candidates. Now, the examples we have shown you throughout this webinar have been taken from Ready for First Third edition. If you'd like, you can find some more information and a few downloads at this link that's highlighted in red. There is a lot of support for teachers on the Cambridge English websites that we've given you here. And if you have any questions, of course, please send them in. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to your questions. Okay, so we've got, I'm waiting for the questions to come in. So what have we got? Why was the compulsory writing task changed from a letter to an essay? Cambridge First is being used more and more for academic recognition. So an essay is perhaps more suitable for for work and for academic purposes, for study purposes, for career, and maybe closer to what students might be using the certificate for, and also for general purposes, yes, in general. So any other questions? Do I need to get new materials to prepare my students for the new exam? Let's say the answer could be yes and no. As we have said, tasks haven't changed a lot. So there's a lot of the material that we already have which we can still use, but for example, in the use of English and the reading, they have fewer questions, so this is something they need to bear in mind because it's a question of time management. As we have said, the letter is no longer a compulsory task, the essay is, so yes, but we need to adapt it a little. We can still use material we already have, we just need to adapt it maybe a little. Any other questions? Is the exam more difficult now that it's shorter? Well, I guess it depends on what you mean by more difficult. I mean, it's still a B2 exam. The fact that it has to be dealt with in short time doesn't really make it more difficult because they're actually given fewer questions. They have 10 less questions. It's more a question of perhaps learning to manage time, but I wouldn't say it's more difficult. It's getting them to practice managing their time. I have, why did Cambridge English decide to put reading and I've lost it, reading and use of English together? Well, as we've said, they share the same key features, and a lot of the strategies they need to use are very similar. And actually changing the order, so having use of English before reading, is actually getting the candidates to focus from word level to longer pieces of text. So in a way, it seems more logical to work in that direction. So I think we're running out of time. So I think that's all the questions we can deal with. So thank you so much for being with us today. And don't forget, there is another webinar in 2 weeks' time. Bye. Bye, everyone.